Welcome back to the Cloudera Navigator Optimizer walkthrough series. In this installment, we'll take a look at the overall UI of the app and also explore the workload that we just uploaded. The dashboard of Navigator Optimizer gives you a brief overview of what's happening in your workload. We start with some basic statistics about the queries analyzed, their duplication, what's actually happening in the queries, what's happening in the tables, and some other high-level information about what's happening in your workload. As Cloudera Navigator analyzes your workload, it's actually able to lay out the relationships between the fact and the dimension tables it finds in an ER diagram. This diagram shows not only the relationships, but also the operations by which the tables are connected. The different colors map to the different operations, as shown in the legend here, and the text within each one tells you what the column is. The darker the color, for example in date key here, the more often that column attaches this dimension table to this fact table using the join operation. Let's move on to some more detailed analysis on the assessment page. The assessment page breaks down your workload into three different sections. We have some information about the tables, the queries, and also the columns. Let's look at the tables. The first information that we have here relates to top tables overall, top fact tables, and top dimension tables. What does this mean? Navigator Optimizer looks at the access patterns for the tables and figures out which tables are accessed the most often. The most telling pattern in this graph is something you can observe here. This is called a cliff. This is when one fact table, or any kind of table, is accessed many more times than the next set of tables. So this tells us that this table is inherently interesting in the business use case that this workload is being used for. So let's take a look at what this is. If you click on it, it brings up some information about that table. And what it is CRM dates. So we know that dates are very important to the part of the business that's running these queries. Later on, we can also click into this dates table to get an overall detail page relating to that table. If you want to bookmark this table for later use, you can also hit this star. That adds it to favorites, so now you know that you can always come back to it. We can also look at the same information for fact tables alone, so this is the same info as here, just strips out the dimension tables, and vice versa, we can look at just the dimension tables and see what that access patterns look like. Some other interesting table information that we can look at is least access tables. So these are tables that are either not used at all, or in this case, only used once. No join tables, which we see there's 8 of here, so we can check out what those are doing. And also top inline views. For the query analysis, we look at top queries by instance count, which is to say by duplication. You see that these two queries are by far the most duplicated out of the entire workload. As a matter of fact, there's 164 instances of both of them, which makes up 11% of your workload. So these guys will definitely be interesting to look at and figure out why are they duplicated so much and how can we optimize them. You can also view this as a chart, so visually you can really tell that those are taking up a lot more of the workload. You can also look at top queries by elapsed time, that thing that we added using the CSV. This actually gives us a very good metric for figuring out which queries to focus on. For example, we see that this query is by far the longer elapsed time than the other ones. You can also use a chart. Some other information here, single table queries, complex queries, join intensity. Some very interesting stuff is compatibility. So Impala compatible queries, for example, will show us the number of queries that are compatible with Impala first of all, the number that are incompatible, and then this graph down here shows us the amount of errors that are experienced. The number of unique queries that have only one error, it looks to be approximately 75. 2 errors a little bit higher, 3 errors a little bit higher than that. So it looks like most of the queries have about 3 errors in them. This is important to be able to focus later on which queries we would like to take to Hadoop and which might be the least work for us to focus on in terms of SQL rewrite. Of course, same information for Hive compatibility. For columns, we look at top columns once again, top select, top where, top joins, top group bys. And again, we still look for cliffs all the time. Out of all of these graphs that we just saw, this one may be the most interesting because this one actually exhibits a cliff. And if we click on it, it tells us which table it belongs to and what the column is. And again, you'll notice that it's date key, right? We already noticed that the most accessed table is CRM dates, and here the column as part of it, date key, is the most accessed once again. As you can see, the assessment page holds a lot of information. By now you might be wondering, how do you know what to focus on out of all these charts and all these pieces of data about your workload? For that, we have a data feed. The feed is activated out of the menu down on the left, and what it is your workload at a glance. Navigator Optimizer is able to tell you what some of the high-level information that is important in your workload might be. For example, let's look at what the feed can tell us for this workload. It's split into several different sections. High impact, bits that are the most important to your workload. This is usually high duplication and high elapsed time, just because focusing on those queries is usually the first thing that we start with. So we can see that in this particular workload, there's actually no dominant duplicate query set. What this means is there's no one set of queries that are significantly enough duplicated that we would probably want to look at it right away. But we do have some interesting table usage. We know that 17.2% of the tables are accessed only once. And if we click on this links us into the least accessed tables. So we can actually, by clicking into each one of these, check out what are these very little access tables. So that might be interesting. We also know that 8.3 of the tables are not joined with anything. It's 8.3%. That's a fairly big chunk of the workload that's not joining with anything, and we might be curious to investigate why that is. Some of the more interesting information here is column usage. We see that 29.6% of filters contain CRM exact type code column. Let's click on that and see where that takes us. So this is the table detail page where we can see some of the specific information pertaining to this dimension table, the operations that happen on it, the total number of queries, the unique queries, its joins, and its column access frequency. We see that the most accessed column is this exact type that we just clicked into, and it's usually filtered by, so that's what that insight was relating to. That's something that we might want to investigate in the future to see how we can optimize that. The other interesting bit here is over half of the workloads group bys contain CRM dates.calDateDT column. So again, this is our most popular table that we already looked at, and the column calendar day DT is the most group by. And again, this takes us to the table detail page. Complexity-wise, we know that 83.6% of the queries have joins, so the vast majority. Again, we can click into the complex queries section here and check out what are those numbers in terms of instances for each of the complex operators. So the function of the feed is generally to give you a high-level overview of things that are out of the ordinary and should be paid attention to. So anything that basically summarizes any kind of cliff and any kind of section that we have analyzed will show up here. The goal of this is to guide you towards the first most important piece of data in your workload. So that's about it for assessment. In the next installment, we'll talk about patterns and also adding queries and tables to the designer to optimize them for Hadoop. Thanks for listening.